All right, hello. I'm making an audiobook for the assault. I always listen to audiobooks for my school assignments, and there wasn't any for this book. So, taking one for the team here. I got you guys. Let's get it started. This is the first episode, 1945, chapter 1. It was about 7:30 in the evening. The coal stove had been purring softly, fed by a few bits of wood, and then gone out again. Anton was sitting at the table, in the back room with his parents and Peter. A zinc cylinder, about the size of a flower pot, was standing on a dish. A thin pipe stuck out of the top, split in two like a Y, and from little holes at its tips emerged two pointed, blinding white flames that were aimed at each other. This gadget cast a dull light through the room, silhouetted against the deep shadows. The much darned and mended laundry was hung up to dry. The light also revealed mounds of unironed shirts, a box to keep the food warm, and two piles of books from his father's study. The row on the dresser to be read, the stacks of novels on the floor to light the emergency stove, which the cooking was where the cooking was done. Whenever there was anything to cook, newspapers had not appeared in months. Except for sleeping, all daily life took place here, in what used to be the dining room. The sliding doors were kept closed. Behind them, on the street side, the living room had not been used all winter. Even in daytime, its curtains remained closed against the cold, so that the house looked uninhabited from a quay side. It was January 1945. Almost all of Europe had been liberated and was once more rejoicing, eating, drinking, making love, and beginning to forget the war. But every day, Harlem looked more like one of those spent gray clinkers that they used to take out of the stove, where when there had been coal to burn. A dark blue sweater lay on the table in front of his mother. She had already unraveled half of it. In her left hand, she held the growing ball of wool around which her right hand quickly wound the sweater's yarn. Anton watched the yarn speeding back and forth while the sweater vanished from the world. The sleeves, spread out flat, looked as if they were holding on, resisting this transformation into a ball with all their might. His mother gave him a fleeting smile, and he lowered his eyes to his book. His mother's blonde tresses were coiled over her ears like two ammonite shells. Now and then she stopped and took a sip from her cold tea substitute, made with melted snow from the backyard because the pipes were frozen. She had a cavity in her tooth that couldn't be treated just then. To relieve the pain, she had found a leftover clove in the kitchen to put on a sore spot, just as her grandmother used to do. She sat up straight, but her husband across the table was bent over, reading a book. His dark hair, turning gray, grew into a semicircle like a horseshoe around his bald pate. From time to time, he blew into his hands, which were large and clumsy, though he was not a laborer, but a clerk at the district court. Anton wore his brother's hand-me-downs, while Peter was dressed in an oversized black suit of his father's. Peter was 17, and since he had begun to grow fast, just when there was less and less to eat, his body looked as if it had been put together with sticks of kindling. He was doing his homework. He had not set foot in the street for 2 months because he was old enough to be rounded up by the police and sent to a labor camp in Germany. He was still only in his second year of high school, for he had failed twice. Now he was being taught by his father, homework and all. So he wouldn't fall behind even more. The brothers didn't look anything alike, neither did their parents. Some couples have a striking resemblance to one another. Possibly, this means that the wife looks like her husband's mother, and the husband looks like his wife's father, or something even more complicated, which no doubt it is. The Steenjwick couple, however, were two distinct entities of their sons. Of their sons, Peter had the blonde and blue coloring of his mother. Anton, his father, his father's his father's dark brown complexion, even to the way their nut brown skin grew darker around the eyes. Anton wasn't going to school just then either. He was in the sixth grade, but because of the coal shortage, the Christmas vacation had been extended until the end of the freezing winter weather. He was hungry, but he knew that he wouldn't get his strictly gray sandwich bread with sugar beet syrup until morning. That afternoon, he had stood in line for an hour at the central kitchen in the nursery school. The pushcart, its pans guarded by a policeman with a rifle on his back, had not entered the street till after dark. Once Anton's ticket had been punched, four ladles of watery soup were dished up into the pot he had brought along. On his way home across the lots, he had tasted just a little of the warm sour concoction. Luckily, he would be going to bed soon. In his dreams, there was always peace. No one spoke. Outside, too. All was quiet. The war had lasted forever and would last forever. No radio, no telephone, nothing. The flames hissed. Now and then they sputtered softly. Wrapped in a scarf, his feet stuck into a foot warmer, and his mother had made out of an old shopping bag. Anton was reading an article in Nature and Mechanics. For his birthday, he had been given a second-hand bound copy of the 1938 edition, A Letter to Posterity. A photograph showed a group of well-fed Americans in their short-sleeved shirts, looking up at a large, shiny capsule shaped like a torpedo that hung vertically above their head. The capsule was about to be lowered into a hole 15 meters deep. In 5,000 years, it would be dug up and opened by Posterity, which would then learn what human civilization had been like at the time of the World's Fair in New York. Inside the capsule, made an amazingly durable cupola, um, was a fire-resistant glass cylinder with hundreds of objects, a microfilm containing a survey of science, technology, and the arts in 10 million words and 1,000 illustrations. Newspapers, catalogs, famous novels, the Bible, of course, and the Our Father in 300 languages. Also, messages from famous men, movies of the terrible Japanese bombing of Canton in 1937, seeds, an electric plug, a slide rule, and all kinds of other things. Even a lady's hat that was in fashion during the autumn of 1938. All the important libraries and museums in the world had received a document specifying the location of the cement covered capsule so that it could be retrieved in the 17th century. 70th century. But why, Anton wondered, would they have to wait until precisely the year 6938? Wouldn't it be of interest long before then? Papa, how long is 5,000 years ago? Precisely 5,000 years, said Steendwick without looking up from his book. Yes, I know that, but was there already, say what you mean. Well, the people just like now have civilization? Asked his mother. Yes. Why don't you let the boy formulate it himself? Asked Steendwick, looking at her over the top of the glasses. And then to Anton, civilization was still in its infancy in Egypt and in Mesopotamia. Why do you ask? Because here it says that more than ready, said Peter, and looked up from his dictionaries and grammar. He pushed his homework over to his father and came to stand behind Anton. What are you reading? Nothing, said Anton, bending over the books, hiding it from his brother with his chest and crossed arms. Stop that, Tony, said his mother and pulled him upright. I'm never allowed to look at his. That's a dirty lie, Anton Mousseret, said Peter, upon which Anton held his nose and began to sing in a nasal voice. For I was born with bad luck, and I'll die with bad luck. Quiet, Steendrick called out and slapped the table with the flat of his hand. That his name should be Anton, like the leader of the Dutch Nazi Party with a nuance, of course, and the cause of much teasing. During the war, fascists often called their sons Anton or Adolf, sometimes even Anton Adolf, and proudly set out birth announcements decorated with Germanic ruins or the emblem of the Dutch Nazi Party, a wolf trap. Later, whenever he met someone with either of those names, or the nicknames Ton or Dolph, he'd try and find out if they had been born during the war. If so, it was a sure sign that their parents had been collaborators, and not just by half. The name Anton became acceptable again 10 or 15 years after the war, which goes to show how insignificant Anton Musser actually was. For, of course, the name Adolf still won't do. Not until people are called Adolf again will the Second World War really be behind us. But that means we'd have to have a Third World War, which would mean the end of Adolf's forever. As for the jingle that Anton had been singing in self-defense, it too had become meaningless. It was a nasal refrain sung from a radio comedian called Peter Peck, and uh, at a time when radios were still allowed. In Dutch, Peck means bad luck. But there are many more things about those times that have become meaningless today, especially to Anton himself. Why don't you come and sit next to me, said Steendrick to Peter, taking up the homework. In a solemn voice, he began reading the translation out loud. Just as when rivers swollen with rain and melting snow streaming down from the mountain to a valley basin and welling up of abundant springs gather in their hollow beds, and far away in the mountains the shepherd hear their muffled row. So sounded the shouting and the painful struggle of the soldiers engaged in hand-to-hand battle. How beautiful this is, said Steendrick, leaning back and taking off his glasses. Sure great, said Peter, specifically after I've been working on it for an hour and a half. That lousy sentence. It's worth a day's work. Look at the way he invokes nature, but only obliquely in comparison. Did you notice? What one remembers are not fighting soldiers, but the images of nature, and that goes on existing. The battle has vanished, but the rivers are still there. One can still hear them, and then one becomes oneself, that shepherd. It's as if he wanted to say that all of existence is a metaphor for another reality, and that the whole point is to grasp that other reality. Then, the other reality must be the war, said Peter. Steendrake pretended not to have heard. Very well translated, my boy, except for one mistake. They are not rivers, plural. They come together, but two rivers. Where does it say that? Here, symboleton. That's a duality, the coming together of two things. Two. Now the two armies also make sense. This is a form you find only in Homer. Remember the word symbol, which comes from symbolo, to bring together, to meet. Do you know what a symbolon was? No, said Peter in a tone implying that he couldn't care less. What was it, Papa? Asked Anton. It was a stone that they broke in two. Say I'm a guest in another city, and I ask the host whether he would be willing to receive you too. How can he be sure that you really are my son? We make a symbolon. He keeps one half, and at home I give you the other. So then, when you get there, they can fit exactly together. That's great, said Anton. I'm going to try that someday. Groaning, Peter turned away. Why in God's name should I learn all that? Not in God's name, said Steendrake, peering at him over his glasses. In the name of humanities. You'll see how much pleasure it will give you for the rest of your life. Peter slammed his book shut, piled them up, and said in a strange tone of voice, Who looks at man, laughs if he can. Now, what has that got to do with anything, Peter? Asked his mother. With her tongue, she pushed the clove back in place. Nothing. I'm afraid so, said Steendrake. Sunt puri puratactala dracant. Sorry. The sweater had disappeared, and Miss Steendrake stowed the ball of yarn in her sewing basket. Come, let's play a game before we go to bed. To bed already, said Peter. We've got to save gas. We only have enough for a few days. Miss Steendrake pulled the box out of the drawer of the dresser, pushed the lamp aside, and unfolded the game board. I want green, said Anton. Peter looked at him and tapped his forehead. Do you really think green will make you win? Sure, we'll see about that. Steendrake laid down his book. A moment later, the only sounds were those of the dice being shaken and the pawns being moved across the board. It was almost 8 o'clock. Curfew. Outside, all was still as it must be on the moon. End of chapter 1. Awesome.